Okay, so in this episode of the Leadersmith podcast, we're going to be talking to Jeff Carlucci again. Jeff, as if you've followed the podcast, has been on the show a number of times before, and we're going to be talking about leadership lessons that come from British literature. Stay tuned.
You are listening to The Leadersmith, Darren Gerdes.
Okay, so as I was talking about in the introduction, Jeff Carlucci is back. One of the pleasures of having a podcast is I get to choose whoever I want to talk to. Disclaimer, Jeff is my children's godparents. He was the English teacher across the hall when I was teaching history and government and economics at a little classical Christian school in Chesapeake, Virginia. He's a great friend. I miss him terribly because he's in Virginia and I'm in South Carolina, and I've been here for 10 years, actually longer than that because I was at Liberty for 6 years before that. So it's been too long. Anyway, so I was saying I've been prodding him. Okay, so when are you coming back on the podcast? And well, let me think about what I want to talk about, because he knows that we're talking about leadership things. So he put his thinking cap on, and he came up with a handful of leadership lessons that are actually, as you described it, what, character lessons, but they apply.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he'll talk about those, and we'll see how many we get through in our time together. So Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Darren. And just to reiterate, you are one of my best friends, and I am so thrilled to be able to be on here with you. And I am an avid listener. I think I've listened to every one of your episodes, and I get a lot out of them. So thank you for what you do. I think this is, you are making quite a difference.
And what's better than that you're a listener, is that my kids started listening to it. So if nobody else at all listened to it, my kids are listening to it. So I'm like putting out the best things that I understand about how leadership works, and they're listening to it. So if anybody else is listening, good on you. I'm glad that you're listening and benefiting from it. But if for no other reason, that's worth all the effort that goes into this. So I'm glad that you do listen. If you don't, probably in trouble, right?
Yeah. No, but thank you. So I was really intrigued once we started talking about, you were looking for lessons or leadership from different areas of literature, and we've gone back and forth, as you've said, about what we could talk about. And actually, as I'm in school now, we are preparing for students to come in about a week. And I started considering what I was teaching and the different lessons that I get to teach. You mentioned I teach at a Christian school. So I get to, as a follower of Christ, of course, that informs the way I read literature. Mm-hmm. Thinking about what I was going to tell the students, and I thought, wow, these could be really extrapolated and applied to leadership. Mm-hmm. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to dive right into the first.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like the way that you're tracking with that and trying to think like what actually applies. And, character is so fundamental to leadership that you see it again and again. Military officers will talk about how, or Warren Buffett or whoever, like people in high places where they've experienced a lot of leadership, talk about how character is fundamental to leadership. So I have no doubt that you've come up with some good stuff.
Well, I hope so. We'll find out by the end of the show. So the first one I want to talk about is Beowulf. I think most of your listeners probably have heard about Beowulf. It's a Anglo-Saxon poem that was orally passed down through many generations, finally put into print somewhere between 800 and 1000 BC. Mm-hmm. And Beowulf is this great hero, and he has conquered, and if you know the story, I'm going to go quickly through it. He defeats Grendel. He defeats Grendel's mother, and he is getting all kinds of glory. Now, in the Anglo-Saxon society, the ruling motive for most of their lives was getting glory. That was the most important thing. So he is gaining glory. He has come from a place called Yeatland or Geatland to the Danes, and he's helped Hrothgar, the king of the Danes, to defeat these two monsters.
Okay, can I stop you and ask you some qualifying questions?
Yes, sir.
My daughter is in classical conversations, and this year last week, she just read Beowulf. Okay. And so we were talking about it in the car on the way to the homeschool co-op thing. So one, Grenville, what is Grenville exactly? I read it, but I wasn't exactly sure.
So Grendel,
Grendel.
it's a monster. So we'll back up. Hrothgar is the king of the Danes.
Right.
They have set up this great mead hall, Heorot, where they celebrate their victories. Their celebration awakens Grendel, who was supposed to be an offspring of Cain, supposedly. So we have the good versus evil.
Okay.
And Grendel comes in and at night and kills 30 Danes. And then this happens over and over again. Now, legend has it that the Grendel may have been for them malaria, representative of malaria, or, believe it or not, bear, a large bear or bears that would come in at night, kill the malaria. You go to bed and all of a sudden you wake up and these people have died from malaria. So that may be what it represents.
So Grendel sounded like some kind of monster. It wasn't.
It is.
So yeah, so I couldn't figure out what kind of monster it was, like a dragon or something. I mean, who knows at the time?
It's interesting. I don't know that he's being or whoever wrote it is being very clear about the context.
Okay, so I'm not the only one that. I mean, yeah, okay. And then Beowulf. Now Gracie and I were talking about this on the way to that homeschool co-op. I said, oh, he's Danish. No, he went to Denmark, but he came from where? Where did he actually come from?
Okay, it's Geatland, or that's how I say it. Others will say Yeatland, but it's Geatland.
Which is where?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Anybody know
where that is? I suppose so. I haven't seen it. And for the story, it doesn't necessarily matter.
Okay, so at any rate, to the moral of the story, so when Gracie and I were talking about it, he's like, well, he's not really that great of a leader. He's kind of arrogant. And that was Gracie's takeaway. Is that... Are we on
exactly where we're going?
Mm.
Good, Gracie. Proud
of right. For the record, I want to say that Gracie is smart. And since she's probably going to listen to this anyway, I mean, I figure you might as well say it, right?
Absolutely. So let's get right to the lesson. So Beowulf has defeated these two monsters, Grendel and Grendel's mother. Mm-hmm. And now they're celebrating. And Hrothgar, the old king, Hrothgar is much older than Beowulf. He's the king of the Danes. He pulls Beowulf aside and goes through this very long speech. But right in the middle of the speech, 3-word sentence. He looks at him and says, push away pride. Mm. And we pull that out and talk about that in class. He's telling him, push away pride, because that could be your downfall. And ultimately, at the end of the book, it is his downfall. Beowulf goes back to Geatland. He leads for 50 years, and there's a dragon, a fire-breathing dragon who starts to attack his people. Mm-hmm. He's 85 years old or so. He has plenty of warriors, but because he desires glory, he can't push away the pride. Yeah. He's not capable of defeating the dragon. He is mortally wounded. And what's interesting is the author gives us a foil, a character named Wiglaf, Wiglaf, who is Beowulf's nephew or cousin. And Wiglaf actually is there to help Beowulf defeat the dragon, but gives Beowulf all the credit, says he did nothing, and walks in that humility, and he is then made the next leader of the Geats. But the pushing away pride, so that Gracie was right on it. Yeah. His pride wouldn't let him allow others to do what he said I should be able to do. So what's the lesson for a leader? Pride is, the Bible says it, pride will lead to your downfall. Humility comes before honor. So be humble. If others are good at something or better than you, in fact, I think a hallmark of a good leader is surrounding himself or herself with better talent. And if you can bring that talent in, allow them to do the things that they can do. So for me,
it's
push away pride.
Because we were just talking, my wife and I were just talking about this with pride. We're watching the news and we're looking at what's going on in Afghanistan, right? I mean, the power vacuum that was created and Biden's press conference and and he doubles down on this. And I was quoting Robert Gates, who said Biden has been wrong on nearly every major foreign policy question for the last 40 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And in the Senate, you can look at where, what his positions were, and as opposed to what's going on in the world. And now I'm not trying to turn this political or anything, but so why is like, generals are telling him one thing and he's doing something else. And so my wife and I were just having this conversation talking about like, why is that? And this was 2 days ago. We were just talking about how like it's weird, but leaders get this strange hubris, right? They just, I mean, to the higher they rise, the less tethered they seem to reality. Okay, that's true of presidents. Okay, so I remember like the Romans talking about remember you're mortal, right? There's somebody talking to the Roman emperor saying remember you're mortal, and it's like you need that because you develop this weird pride, this weird hubris the higher you rise. There was this great line created for that. Steve Jobs had what was called that reality distortion field around him. Like he just thought, well, no, I mean, I'm right and we can just make this work. Now, sometimes that works, but sometimes it doesn't. And it's not just true of Beowulf. It's not just true of Steve Jobs. It was true of Hitler. Hitler was right about so many things that he got right, that when he was wrong, he was very wrong and thought he could hold out and was overrun by the Russians and committed suicide. So it's like the higher you rise, you have more of this susceptibility to pride. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, said Lord Acton.
Yeah.
So this is absolutely a crazy important lesson for anybody in leadership. So what was the phrase that he was told? Pride.
Push away pride.
Push away pride. I mean, that's a great lesson. Okay.
Well, it's a great lesson for all leaders, even if you're leading yourself or you're leading a family or leading one other person. All right, so let's move on to John Milton, arguably the greatest writer in the English language, definitely 1A and 1B with Shakespeare. John Milton is known for writing primarily Paradise Lost. And Paradise Lost is considered to be one of the greatest writings, greatest poems in the English language. Milton went blind prior to writing Paradise Lost.
Wow.
Yeah, it was fascinating. And he actually writes a great sonnet about it, on his blindness. And in the sonnet, he almost gets angry with God. He said, how can you deny my ability to do what you've called me to do? And he's, I can't do this. But then he settles down, and he's at the very end, he has the famous line, and he says, God doesn't need either man's gifts or his talents. They also serve who only stand and wait. And he recognized that his job was to serve God, regardless of situation. But we already said that he did write Paradise Lost after going blind. So what does he do? He wakes up about 3 or 4 in the morning. He composes lines in his mind, and a secretary comes in. He dictates it. Next morning, wakes up, composes lines. Okay, read back that to me. Okay, and here are the next lines. And what it did was he didn't get to just listen, look at the words. He had to hear the words, but he heard the sound of every letter. And so we have each letter flowing to the next in a way that would not have been necessary or maybe even able if he hadn't gone blind. My professor in college, Dr. Crawley, he looked at us as a gentleman. It was an all-male school, Hampden-Sydney College, go Tigers. And he said, gentlemen, read Milton, it just feels good in your mouth, meaning it flows naturally. So I contend that Milton writes Paradise Lost, which may be the greatest thing ever written, not despite the fact that he went blind, but because he went blind. So what's the lesson for leadership? Sometimes there are obstacles in your road, and those obstacles, by pushing through them, you refine what it is you're doing, whether it's your product, your skills, your talents, your character, so that on the other side, there is a height, there is something you can reach that's even beyond what you thought. And if you also, and as followers of Christ, if you trust God that what he's put in front of you, you push through, you can trust on the other side, there is something you probably didn't anticipate that's be a benefit to you and as a leader to those that you lead.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, as you were talking, I was thinking of Beethoven going deaf and still writing amazing stuff after. I think Handel also had something with deafness. I don't remember exactly who it was, but I know Beethoven at least had that same kind of thing.
Yeah,
Um, was it Stonewall Jackson had something with like eyesight or
I
something?
think so. Yeah.
He would memorize his lectures at VMI because he couldn't read it. I think it was like a nearsighted some or farsighted. He was farsighted but couldn't read nearsighted or something. I don't remember what it was, but same kind of thing. And they have to overcome the obstacles anyway. So that's a powerful leadership lesson.
Yeah.
And life's not fair. And if you think
No.
it is, then you're going to be sorely disappointed when life bumps up against you and you go, "Whoa, what's
Yeah.
going on?" And you just have to overcome and adapt. And I I know that the default in society right now is I'm not responsible. Somebody else is responsible for my happiness or whatever. You got to change so that I study leaders, I study success, and the people who are really successful, man, they're the kind of people that take responsibility for everything that they do and others. Like I remember one guy talking about, I wish I could find the reference to this. It was like, if it rains, it's my fault. Like, no, it's not really your fault, but yes, you have to brace against it. You have to have the umbrella. You have to be prepared for what you're going to do if
Yeah.
you have to be outside and you should be inside or what. Like, it's your responsibility. Like the way he said it was a little, tongue in cheek, but you have to be responsible for whatever the circumstances are going to be and deal with it and contend with it. So, what a great lesson.
Yeah. All right. So let's go to another one. Alfred Lord Tennyson wrote a poem that's incredibly famous. And I guess I should have said this before. Everything I'm telling you, these are famous, and I'm not the first one to come up with these ideas. It's just something that I get to teach. And you get to let me talk to you about it.
Well, absolutely. But to our audience, like to me, the Beowulf, I missed that line about pride. That's great. What a great lesson. So
Yeah.
don't discount yourself. You're curating some of the best material here, and we appreciate that.
Good. So Tennyson writes Ulysses. Ulysses is Odysseus from the Homer book poems. In Ulysses, one of the most famous lines that Tennyson ever wrote are at the end. But let me just set this up. Ulysses is old. He actually says, "I am old." We're going to guess he's 80, and he hates being the leader of a peaceful nation. He says, "My son Telemachus, he can do that. I'm not good at that. I'm going to go out and I'm going to find adventure." And so he's talking to his sailors, and I'm going to just pop over and read to you the last several lines of this. He says, and he's talking to all the old sailors. He's looking at his ship and he's looking at the ocean. And he says, "Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield." I love that line. We may not be what we used to be, but what we are. And for me, what I talk to the students about, of course, I am getting old. Somebody told me I should stop saying it, but I'm going to be 62 next month, Darren. I mean, life is pushing on. Thank God things are good, but I'm not 22. I still coach soccer. I cannot do on the pitch now with my team what I could do 40 years ago. That which we are. And as a leader, or as I tell my kids, your strengths are going to change. When you're young, as Odysseus said, we just moved earth and heaven. But now we are made a little weaker. But now, and he's saying, we have wisdom, we have understanding, we have a context. There are those things that we can do now, which doesn't mean we still can't accomplish. So I actually had a chance to speak to my parents' senior group at their church a couple of years ago, and we talked about this. I'm 62, my parents are in their 80s. It's not time to give up. as a follower of Christ, God didn't say, oh, you go to 65 and you're on your own. No, I may not do what I could do before, but I can still do something and I still have gifts. I guess what I want the lesson for leadership is almost a twofold one. Persevere and don't artificially discount your abilities because you can't do what you used to do. There are new ways to approach things and you have new strengths. And I guess the second is almost like the first. I'm cognizant, I'll be 62, of this artificial ending of what we are doing to say, oh, I guess it's time to retire. The number says I'm 65, 67, 70. And I think we have to be careful to continue to follow in, whether it's the calling or whether it's a responsibility, knowing that we are given something of value to do as leaders. Mm-hmm. And so to me, that was the lesson from that.
Yeah, it's interesting how you put these back to back because it's still overcoming an obstacle, like in the last lesson. Here, there's just like a compensating mechanism. So as you were talking, I'm thinking about this in myself, and I remember my 20, kind of a punk 20-year-old. I mean, I don't mean punk rocker, but like punk, like attitude, like cocky kind of attitude. And I look back at my 20-year-old self like, oh, what was I thinking?
Yeah.
And I had certain abilities that I don't have now, or not to the same degree, or it takes me extra time to recover physically, right? But I know a whole lot more than I knew then, and I'm better off for what I know. Now, we're in a business, in education, where you get better over time. I mean, unless you get dementia, you get better and better and better every year until the very end. Right.
Yeah,
so there's that. And so the idea of thinking about how to compensate and do it differently in order to do it better, it applies to everything too. It applies like, sometimes people think that to be a good leader, you have to be an extrovert. Introverts can be awesome leaders as long as they arrange their circumstance and their environment so that they can stand in their strengths. And same thing with age or with whatever it is that you have or whatever abilities you have. I remember my first year there at StoneBridge. I followed an incredible teacher, Gay Ferdon. And I remember thinking, it took a couple months, but I remember I kept hearing like, well, you're not Miss Ferdon. And I remember distinctly thinking, well, that's true. She's not Darren Gerdes either. Like, and I didn't mean that in a cocky way. I just meant I bring certain gifts and skills and abilities to the table that she doesn't have either. And we have to think in that way. Like, how are you gifted? How are you geared in order to maximize you, to sing your high notes?
Yeah.
Right. When I say sing high notes, I have a beautiful voice for about 3 notes. After that, I should not be going above or below it because it just doesn't sound right at all. But for those 3 notes, I'm awesome. Right. I seriously, I can sing. So if I can sing a song within that range, I'm great. Yeah. But I know myself well enough. Like we've talked about this. I know myself, right? I know myself well enough to know that's where I have to stay. And I stay within whatever I talk about. I'm talking about leadership. I'm not talking about what's under the hood of my car because I'm lost. I'm hopeless. Yeah. So that's a great lesson for all leaders.
Yeah. I've always respected that about you. Even because I knew you were in your late 20s, not when you were a 20-year-old punk. Always had an understanding of what it was that you should do and what you should not do to accomplish what God had for you. You've always exemplified that.
And I don't think there's any world-class leader anywhere who deviates from that. Not to my knowledge. From what I've read, from what I understand, everything that I have spent my time trying to understand about leadership, they know themselves. And they sing their high notes and they try not to get out of that range. I mean, there's something to be said for expanding and growing and learning, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about they stay within their scope of competence and are very hawkish about doing that.
Yeah. So the next lesson, it moves me a little bit more. So far, we've talked about pushing away pride. We've talked about perseverance in 2 different manners. The next one is from Wordsworth. And it's a poem, and I want to read a portion of it to you. It's called, She Dwelt Among the Untrodden Ways. Actually, it's so short, I'm going to read the whole thing. She dwelt among the untrodden ways, beside the springs of Dove, a maid whom there were none to praise and very few to love. A violet by a mossy stone, half hidden from the eye, fair as a star when only one is shining in the sky. And this is the key. She lived unknown, and few could know when Lucy ceased to be, but she is in her grave, and oh, the difference to me. And when we talk to the students about this, we talk about not measuring your success by numbers. And this one, I lead a class. I led my family. I get to lead a life group. I can tell you I have 18 in this class and 30. But what this is telling me is there may be one person that you impact. And as a leader of an organization, you may lead a lot, but there's that one person that maybe gets in the way, or there is one person. What Wordsworth is talking about, and I think he's talking about, we're not really sure who, this is a Lucy poem. Lucy, we think, is a conglomeration of several people. I like to think of this as his sister who had passed away, and they lived by the Dove River. When she died, he said, almost nobody knew. You didn't really impact anybody else, but oh my goodness, you impacted me and changed my life forever. As a teacher, if we could have that one person that looks at you and looks at me and says, you impacted my life forever, what a difference. So,
okay, so what you were just saying, I heard the poem and I kind of zoned there for a little bit. What I was trying to follow what the point is.
Yeah.
This is not my expertise, and I don't. This is why you're here, right? You're unpacking this. Help me see the line again that connects that to the. If you can just help one person, what line specifically?
Okay. So I am extrapolating a lesson out of this. So the last 4 lines. She lived unknown, and few could know when Lucy ceased to be. So there we're seeing her influence was very, very minimal. There was a huge funeral. Nobody really knew her well. She wasn't famous. But, and this is, so you get, but she is in her grave, and oh, the difference to me. So we see that, and he's saying nobody really knew her, and she wasn't famous. She didn't accomplish a lot. But her relationship, the impact she had on me, what a difference. Now, he's saying she's in the grave and now my life is different. But I think that's easily changeable to my life is different because
of her, yeah.
And so I think as a leader, it's what makes when a student comes in my room during a planning bell, and I've got a boatload to do that the administrator has given me, and they just need to talk for 10 minutes and they're in the way of my plans, you just stop and you give them that 10 minutes. Because you actually, as teachers, and you know this, and as leaders, you actually have no idea what 8 to 10 minutes in somebody's life can mean. So that's what I'm saying. So the lesson that I thought would be great for your listeners as leaders, do not discount the disturbances in your plan and your schedule. Do not discount the people that come in your way and the impact you can have on one person, or your business is not impacting a lot. You're not having great success according to the world, according to money, maybe according to size. But are you having success in the life of a person? And I have talked over the years, people over things. And this is a people over things thought.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you were talking through that, one, I totally missed the point of the poem itself, which is why that's why you do what you do. And
I read it pretty quickly. Yeah, I went through it quickly.
When you unpacked it, I understood what you were saying. And sometimes leaders discount themselves because, or people, let's just say generally, people discount themselves as leaders because they think they have to be Steve Jobs or President so-and-so or have that title of leader. No, you're affecting people. Like my parents still affect me.
Yes.
Like you never stop, you never relinquish that, right?
Yeah.
I'm cognizant, like you were talking about the 10 minutes, and I don't always do this because my kids will be listening to this. I'm admitting right up front. Sometimes I'm just tired or too shot to be able to do it and grouchy and whatever. No, just go, leave me alone. We'll talk tomorrow. But I'm cognizant of even time in the car,
Yeah.
right? As we're on the way to somewhere, that's not time to be squandered. That's time where they still want to talk about whatever it is. And how can I and as a homeschooler, you're aware that it's a constant thing. It's not just I'm learning here at school. No, you're learning all the time in whatever we're doing. And that time, the intentionality of that you're ministering and you're speaking into somebody's life has to be there
Yeah.
all the time. And and again, you fall flat, you're not perfect, but you still think more in that way than not. And that you never know where the result is from that kind of thing. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Uh, by the way, and I said this the first time that you and I did a podcast together, but I learned the greatest leadership lesson
Uh,
I've ever learned from this man, Jeff Carlucci, who taught me my first year teaching probably the most valuable leadership lesson I've ever learned, which was I am not teaching my subject matter, I'm teaching students. And that changed everything for me. So I'm not teaching history and government and econ. That's not it. I'm teaching people about that subject. So it's like the direct and indirect object kind of thing. If
yeah.
I
Yeah.
nerd out with with the English teacher, right?
Yeah.
So I'm teaching them about this subject. And so yeah, I mean, once I got that I'm ministering to people, wow, it changed everything. And that's true for all leaders. You're
Yeah.
leading people in the context of the organization, trying to get them to meet their goals, but you're dealing with them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
So thank you for that again, and that's
You're
another
welcome.
great lesson. Now, here's the thing. I am now at about a half hour, and I've tried desperately to keep this to a half hour. So let's continue in part B, if we can do that.
Okay.
Okay, in the next episode, and so we'll just pick up right where we are and go from there. Is that okay?
Sounds great. Thank you,
Okay.
man. I love it.
Thanks.